What did you, Gary? I think. Thanks for the question, Jim. What did you have,
Gary?
Gary?
Yes, actually, I had two questions, but the first one is, um, I have great friends, 60 years in or 78 years in Montana, and we all have different ideas and diversity about people that are coming up from a life that you lived as young people. But they, for some reason, some of them don't care. And I said, but you have to give them a chance. So either one of you, Louis or Lee, just kind of start. Louis, you were 12. Lee, you were, I don't know how old you were when troubles began. Did you have a good home? Did you have a struggling home? Just kind of tell us about the background that got you started on the road to your downfall.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Gary and Louis. If you don't mind, I'll kind of go first a little bit, and it's an interesting life that I lived. I'm one of seven kids. We were living in Oklahoma when my father was murdered, and I was six and a half. So that left my mother with seven kids to kind of raise on her own. And she didn't work at before my father was killed, and so there was a big transition in my life, and it wasn't all roses with my father either. He was struggling with alcoholism, and he was very abusive. And my older brothers and siblings, this was our beginning of our role models. And I ended up moving 22 times and went to 12 different schools in the span of 6.5 years old to 17 when I actually committed my life crime. And always being a new guy, going into new schools, and there was shame, there was bullying, being picked on. There was not feeling like I belonged, not feeling like I had worth, not feeling like I had value. These were all things that were a struggle for a young boy to kind of deal with. And it's it's one of those things where those feelings within me kind of took over my better judgment. The things that gave me an outlet were to fight back. The things that gave me an outlet was to abuse marijuana. I would literally numb my pain away, and I started smoking marijuana at the age of 7 years old. And so it was, if we talk about prefrontal cortex and the development of the brain, that type of thing, I was stunting all of that. And even though I was going through a lot of trauma, and not only physical, emotional, sexual abuse, there was many things that happened in my young childhood. Um, I come to find out there's plenty of people that have gone through similar things that didn't make the choices that I made, and I just made a lot of terrible choices, Gary, and those terrible choices kept being exacerbated by the next choice and the next choice. And I found myself continuously making bad choices. And it wasn't like I made all bad choices. I was involved in my community. I used to mow my neighbor's yard because she was blind and she couldn't do it. And like there was a lot of really good people that kind of passed through my life that I wish that I was able to have clinged onto a little more. But I had, you know, drug addicted siblings that were raising siblings. And so growing up in that type of lifestyle, there's the saying, when you know better, you do better. I didn't really consciously want to do better because this was what I was exposed to. And as I hit my rock bottom, that's when the change really started to kind of manifest in my life. Um, there was a brief moment in time leading up to that where I was on the cusp of changing because some of my siblings had grown out of the household, and I started like really delving into wanting to join the military. I knew that I needed structure in my life at some point in some time. But at that point in time in my life, things had just snowballed and out of control. And I got to a point to where it just seemed like I couldn't, like an avalanche was coming over the top of me, and I just couldn't stop it. And for the people that don't believe that, like Brian Stevenson had that quote of, people are better than the worst decision that they've ever made in their life. It's something like that. And I'm paraphrasing. Um, for people that don't believe in that, just think about your worst decision, is what I would say. Just think about your worst choice. And if everybody knew that, and that's the thing that you wore on your sleeve at all times in your life, and you were always going to be judged for that thing, it's a difficult scarlet letter to kind of to wear. And what would you, or what would they do knowing that? How would they respond? How would they react? And um there's no taking back the choices that we make and the things that we say. And I see that there's plenty of loving married couples probably on this thing, and that. And whether it's we say something that's insensitive to our loved one, there's no one ringing that bell once it's been rung. And but we can live and try to be kind and gentle in our next engagement with that person. And I think that's really the message that I've carried throughout my life, is I'm going to make bad choices, and I'm going to make negative decisions, or I'm going to make mistakes in my life. But the thing is how am I going to carry that with me in the next engagement that I have with humanity, or with the next person that I come in contact with? And that's the kind of message that I would tell somebody, is like, um, the next person that you come in contact with, or the next engagement that you have, just be your kind, gentle, loving self, and carry that with you. And I think everything else will work out for itself. And we're not here to change everybody's mind. People they're gonna develop their own way of thinking based upon their own experiences and their own interpretations. And that's fine. That's the beautiful and wonderfulness about your friends, Carrie, is because they all have different types of opinions, and they all have a collective bond, and that's friendship. And everything else, maybe they'll change, maybe they won't, maybe you'll change. And so I think that's kind of how everything is happened for me, from point A to kind of like how I live my life now. And so I know Louis' story really well. When I was teaching a class called Helping Youth Offenders Understand Their Harm, it was derived specifically for people that committed crimes as juveniles. And that's when I first met Louis. And that's where we created that arena. That's where we created that space where individuals like him could literally come in here, and I would start guiding the group. And these were the things that we would start to unpack, and these were the things that we would start to share. And prison is such a diverse like petri dish, and like a lot of different cultures that are clashing over things that they don't even really know what they're clashing over. And it's over fear, is what it really comes down to, is fear to be themselves, and their fear to be isolated, and their fear of not being able to survive a very trauma filled environment. And so when they come into the class, I immediately break all down those barriers and those walls. I don't care what ethnicity they are, or um, where they've grown up, or what type of traumas that they've um, been exposed to, or that they've committed against others. Let's put it all on the table, and let's discuss it. Let's unpack it. Let's flesh it out, and let's talk about it, and really discuss the impact, and how it's not only impacted you personally, but impacted those around you. And I think that right there gives a holistic approach of somebody being able to really come into themselves. So Louis, if you wanted to talk a little bit
Yeah.
about your upbringing, and Luciano, and
Thanks,
your
Lee.
life. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry,
Lee
Lee,
and
I
I,
didn't hear the end of that. If you can hear me, for some reason, my sound is gone. So thanks for answering my question.
You're welcome. Thank you, Gary.
so yeah, thanks, Lee. Thanks, Gary. So Lee and I share a lot of similarities as far as growing up. Um, I too, like, by the time I was 16, I probably moved 12 or 13 times, went to 10 different schools. So, there was no stability in my life. I lost my father when I was 7. My mom, to give some context, my mom is Korean. She emigrated to the United States a few years before I was born. She didn't know English. She married my father, who was Italian. So when my father passed away, she's in this. My mom, she's raising two kids by herself, and you know, I love my mom. I want to say that, but she was extremely neglectful in her upbringing of me and my brother. And looking back, she was being the best mom that she could be at that time. And I knew that she always loved us, but for me, it wasn't enough for me at that time. And I placed no blame on my mom for the choices that I made, but just being objective. And, so there was a lot of times that I was at home alone, from a young age. Um, we're talking from 7 to 16. By the time I was 16, my brother was in prison and I was living home alone. I was cooking for myself. There was nobody home, no role models, it was by myself. I had dropped out of school. And how I got to that point was there was a lot of abuse in the home. There were times when my mom was extremely angry, violent. I was sexually molested by my uncle. Uh, that's a difficult thing for me to kind of at that age to really process that. It was just extremely shameful. And when Lee mentioned fear is everything. um, I was afraid of showing people who I was. I was afraid of who I was because I didn't want anybody I felt I had this image, such a horrible image of inferiority of who I was. I didn't want anyone to see who I was, to know who I was. So it was easy for me to gravitate towards gangs. I sought support from gangs. I looked up to them. I followed my brother in this footstep. And, when there's no one in the home, when the home is unstable, when there's no role model, it's so easy to go to the street and find that support from gangs, from people who are affirming me, calling me the little homie, praising me, making me feel loved, making me feel safe. As crazy as that sounds, I felt safe at 12 years old running the streets of Los Angeles, infested with gangs. I felt safe out there with my homies, with my friends, with my gang. In the home, I didn't feel safe. I felt scared. I felt alone. I felt worthless. So, um, how I got into that path, it's trauma, it's fear, it's shame, it's having nothing at home, having no support, not having the tools to cope, not having the tools to be aware of asking for help, not knowing that that's an option. And then when drugs, I got addicted to drugs at 12 years old. I was smoking crack, marijuana, drinking, using acid, almost on a daily basis. And not knowing what addiction was at that time. I was 12 years old, addicted to drugs, and didn't have a clue of what addiction was and how that it was affecting me, how that it was affecting my thinking, my behavior. I was stealing from my own family. Um, you know, I was just completely out of control, and it wasn't it wasn't hard for me to continue to make these horrible decisions. How Lee put it, this snowball effect. And the thing about behavior and addiction is it declines. Every aspect of my behavior, of my thinking, spirituality, emotionally, was declining, and to the point where my existence felt meaningless when I was 16 years old. And that's how I came to the point where I took a life um, in a robbery. In one split second decision, I made the horrible decision to pull out a gun and shoot an innocent human being. That's all it took, is one split second. And I get emotional. Um, and how Lee put it, it's difficult to carry that, to wear that. Um, and when you really come to terms with who you were at that time and how this came to be, that's the process of transformation too. And I would say, like, for people who don't believe in um, second chances, redemption, people should stay in prison, they committed this horrible act. And then the question I would ask is, are you giving up on human beings? Are you giving up on humanity? So are you looking at the behavior? Are you looking at the act? Or are you looking at the individual, the human being? Because if you could say that someone at 16 who committed this horrible crime, or at 17 in Lee's case, who committed this horrible crime, at that age, for the act that he committed, that we committed, if that person is so irreparably corrupt that he's just no longer fit for society, this kid can no longer ever change his life. This kid is just worthless. If you can say that about a kid or about any human being, then I would ask is, who are you investing in? Who are you investing? Are you investing in human beings? Because I do. I invest in human beings. I like to look at the goodness of people. And even when I was in my worst state, I always knew that I had some good inside of me. Even then, you know? So, I can understand how it can be difficult to look at someone and not be repulsed by the horrible actions, crimes that are sometimes gruesome and horrible. I can understand that. When my brother was murdered, it took me a long time to get to the point where I forgave the person who murdered my brother. But I can honestly say today that I don't feel resentment. I don't feel hatred. I don't feel anger, because I'm coming from a point of compassion and empathy. So, it's a difficult topic, and like Lee said, we're not here to change everyone's opinion. People are entitled to believe, um, you know, have their own beliefs and opinions. But I personally would like to challenge that, and I would say, let's look at the human being. Let's look at the individual for who they are today, not 30 years ago when they committed this horrible, horrible crime. Not 10 years ago. Who are they today? And ask yourself, okay, so what are we punishing? Are we punishing if an individual has changed his life and he lives peacefully, he wants to get back. What's the point of incarceration if he's done his time, if he's served his sentence, 25, 30? What's the point of incarceration now? Is it to punish the human being? Is it to cause him to suffer? What good is that doing? Or do we give this human being a second chance? Do we support him and say, we see you as a human being, we value your life? Do we do that? And do we support him? That's what I would have to say.
Hi, Gary. Kathy, do you have a question?
Kathy and Larry have a question, I think. Go ahead, Owens.
Thank you both for sharing this. But a question: now that you're free out of prison, what resources are available to you, and how effective do you think they are, and how could they improve?
You want me to go, Louis? Great question. I would call you Mr. Kathy because there's only one name there, but great question. Thank you so much, and I appreciate it. So there are resources available, and it really just depends on the state you live in. But in California, in particular, we are basically a Democrat or liberal state, and so there's a lot more understanding and push towards rehabilitation and transformation versus punishment. And so as far as, and I want to be like as unbiased and objective
Just say it, Lee.
as I
Just
can.
say it.
There's a lot of things that are in place that need fixing. There's a lot of things that need tweaking. And I think that when um, money and greed come into play, that we lose sight in what we're actually investing in with our tax dollars. Um, so there are things that are mandated, especially if you were a former lifer in California, that you need to go to transitional housing. And within transitional housing, it's like a 6 months to a year program. They are There are programs available that are supposed to cover addiction. They're supposed to cover the basic things of how to get your documents, how to basically live autonomously. And then there are things that are like groups that you go to, which can be useful, I guess, with networking, but they're really unnecessary because all of the lifers that actually come out in California have already gone through these things in order to even get out here. There's a whole process that they have to go through in order to get out here. So it's like redoing the things that are unnecessary. There are connections with welfare services. It's a little bit harder to get a job, and not that people aren't open to hiring you, but it's the experience, right? You need some levels of experience to be able to parlay your prison duties or your prison experience into real world jobs out here. And so that's a little bit more difficult. You need somebody to just basically take a chance. And this is where the interview processes come in. Um, and there's not many, I would say, advantageous programs considering the amount of money that they spend on the things out here. I think the Theaters Works Project, there's several organizations that kind of embrace, they have this wraparound type of service. Not only do they invest into the people in there, but once they get out here, they continue that investment, and networking is huge. And I think it's within the kindness of their own hearts. It's not systemically like sponsored type of thing where the state or the taxpayers' money is kind of going into those services. I know our governor has just like slashed a lot of funding for some of the programs that are in there, and he's also done some good things where he's limiting the amount of type of parole that people would have to spend, because that's just another tether. It's another form of incarceration once people get out here, because they can't really like venture out further than 50 miles, which makes no sense. If you're going to break a law 50 miles from here, you're going to break it 100 miles from here. So, and I mean, there's law enforcement and people to kind of take care of that. It's not like we wear ankle monitors and they're following us around. There's 60 people on one parole officer's caseload. And so they literally come in and check in with me every other month and go, "Hey, how are you doing?" "I'm doing fine. I'm working. I'm doing this. I'm doing that." He goes, "Great, cool. I'll see you in another 2 months." And so there's really no type of like intervention or like encouragement. There's no like connecting me to resources and that type of thing. So, there's some things that are archaic and that have been put into place that are unnecessary now. Um, and so the further tying or tethering people to rules and boundaries, I think, are unnecessary. And what we really need to invest in is networking and community building. And I think how we do that is by getting civically involved, maybe volunteering within our communities. If I was running a transitional house, this is the things that I would be doing. We twice a week, instead of them going to some type of anger management class that they've spent 3 years in, I would be going to, Skid Row, or I would be going to the local church. I'd be going into the neighborhood and helping the people that maybe can't do their own yard work, or people that need some cleanup and these types of things. These are the types of activities and the programs that I would have people involved in. And then afterward, we would break bread and we would talk, and we would have these types of fireside chat discussions and these types of things to be able to start really investing in our communities and the people that are around us. And so I think there's a lot of tweaking that could be done, Mr. Kathy. I think there's a lot of tweaking that could be done. And I think that there's some really good people and organizations out there that also feel that way and that are pushing for those types of implementations of how Louis calls them programming, in implementation of those types of procedures that I think would benefit not only us as human beings returning back and feeling welcome in our community, but also to be able to let the community see and start to really embrace the people that are returning to society. Because I know I'm going to start spouting statistics, but there's 50,000 people that are currently on parole in California. We have ACA 6 that's going on the ballot. It's going to pass the Senate today. I know it will. And it's going to go on the ballot and it's going to give them voting rights. There's 130,000 people that are currently incarcerated in California. 90% of those people are going to return back to the streets. And who do we want to return back to the streets? Do we want people that are civically involved and people that are like in the type of mindset that Louis and me and many thousands of other people are? Or do we want people that are coming out here that don't feel welcome in the communities? And those were the same exact factors, causative factors that led them to offend in the first place. So where do we want to go? Do we want to embrace them as people that are pro-social, behavioral type of supporting people, or do we want them to go back to the gang infested, committing crimes, that type of mindset? And so I say the former rather than the latter. And I think that's right there is some procedures that we could put into place and kind of work out. And I feel like I'm running for office right now. Louis, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah.
Go ahead.
I'd vote for you. So yeah, you know, Lee put it. He was very politically correct when he was, I'm going to say the system is broken. To me, it's a joke. In many ways, it's a joke. My experience, of course, but my experience is a little bit different because I've been released during a pandemic, so it's a little bit different for me. But I'm gonna say this: they have the system, what they have in place. They have this sort of standardized cookie cutter idea of how it looks when people are transitioning out. This is what you have to do. You have to go through this. You have to sit through 10 classes a day and, all day long, and as Lee mentioned, there's a process when long-term offenders are getting out. It's not just like, hey, we're opening doors, go ahead. There is a process. This is work that Lee and myself have been doing for a decade, if not longer. Lee's been doing it longer than I have. And to come out and to go on what they call like a blackout period. A lot of times it's lockdown periods, blackdown periods where you can't see your family, you can't do this, you have to stay in these classes 10 hours a day. It's not individualized. It should be, it should be personal. And the system right now, it's not set up to support long-term offenders or lifers who are being released, people who have served 30 years and that are being released. It's not set up for that. And I think, one of the biggest things is we need to start bringing long-term offenders who have successfully transitioned. We need to start bringing them into conversation to figure out, okay, how can we do this? How can we set something up to support individuals who are coming out after decades of incarceration? And not just this sort of program, you have to go through this, and they call it treatment, right? And right now, what my treatment is, I'm going to give you an example. Everything's done by phone. I talk to a clinician twice a week for an hour each time, someone I've never met, someone where I have no connection to. And you're going to ask me questions and try to process me. How are you feeling? That's not what I need for treatment. What is that? I don't even know who you are. I'm talking to you over a phone. I don't want to share with you. You know what I mean? And then there's this homework assignment. It's very generic questions. What makes you angry today? So is that the treatment that I need? No, absolutely not. I need family reunification. I need positive civic engagement. I need job training. I need to be able to connect to resources. And there's resources out there. I'm not saying that there's not, but the liaison, someone who can connect me to resources, that's what's lacking. I don't have that. There's nobody here to say, okay, here are the resources. This is what you needed. So I've had to we rely on each other in here. So it's almost like if I'm coming home and there are people in here in the home right here in the transition house that have been out for a couple of months, I rely on them to mentor me and to guide me and to navigate me. This is what you need to do. You need to sign up for this. You need to do this. But it's not provided by staff in where I'm at, maybe in some homes. So, it's lacking. Um, for me, it's lacking in almost every area. It does provide shelter. That's a good thing. It does provide a place, a home to live where you don't have to pay rent, where you can ideally save money. Look at Lee's dog. You know, um, but if we need to start focusing on individuals, I always say that, and not look at the. If we sometimes when we look too, we broaden our scope too wide. We forget about the individual. What's the best thing to support Louis? You're not looking at a paper. Oh, he served 25 years. He's this. He's that. He's that. He has to go through this program. How about having a conversation with me, figuring out what my support system is, where I need the most support, and create a plan? Those are the things that I feel like we need in our system.
James, did you have a question?
No, I'd like to interrupt briefly, just a couple of things. First, we've passed our hour. It seems to me that we're doing very well here and everyone's interested because we've got more participants today than we've ever had, which is good. I also want to mention that here in Missoula specifically, or in Montana, first, I think I can say with some degree of accuracy, the laws in Montana are not quite as generous as the laws in California in terms of support to people leaving prison that Louis and Lee have described. Here in Missoula, there are two groups. One is called Welcome Back, which is primarily ex-incarcerated or returning citizens helping their fellows as they come out. And another is called Partners for Reintegration. Those we've heard in the past from Partners for Reintegration. But those are two groups that if anyone's interested, they might want to try to connect with. And if they have trouble connecting, let me know and I can help them. Another thing I do want to say is recommend once again the person that Lee mentioned, Brian Stevenson. Specifically, if you haven't read it, read his book, Just Mercy. It will really help you understand some of what's going on. Now, Louis, Lee, and Whitney, as long as you all want to stick around, I know our commitment is 1 hour, but I'm sure we have other questions. So I'll see if there are any other questions. If not, I'd like to hear briefly from Whitney and Leah what your program is all about. If you could give us kind of a quick overview of what your program is that has helped Louis get to where he is. Thank goodness.
Are you guys staying on for a second? Is that okay? Yeah?
Yeah, I have another appointment in about 20 minutes. So.
Okay, well,
Yep.
Hopefully will not take that long. Really quickly, just a brief thing about Leah's program that we met Louis in is we actually do a show and it's scripted material. So unlike a lot of the other stuff on the A Yard, which was a lot of devised pieces, it was actually from August Wilson and actual plays that we felt spoke to a certain theme. And in this case, it was fathers and sons. And I have to say, I can remember the specific moment. I remember seeing Louis jumping around the room, being like, "That's the little boy." And it just popped out. And so when you were saying that, I really appreciate that, Louis. But that's part of the process. Is it's just and Leah can speak more to this if she would like to. But from my perspective, it's just first we get each other to play. There's a sense of awkwardness and safety that we kind of just have to like let go, and eventually some of the toughest looking people you'll ever see are kind of jumping around the room and laughing together, and it doesn't matter race, it doesn't matter gang, they're just in this place. and then we break off into scenes, and we get to discuss, whatever the scenes are. They're generally got a lot to them, so we get to discuss whatever emotions are coming through that, and we get to work through that, and how do we bring that up as an actor, and how do we take a mask off, how do we put it back on. And then the real magic happens when we have to put together a show, and they have to memorize all their lines, and they can, and they do. And then we do it like a real show. So we're not going to help them with their lines. If they are up there and they forget, they have to help each other. And there's something about depending on each other to make an experience for their families that it's all in. They're all in. And I feel like I've just witnessed magic over and over and over again, because they hold each other accountable, and I know we've had people who had a really hard time memorizing, and there were people who wanted the role that they had, and instead of being jealous and like not doing anything, they helped them learn the line. There's just a lot of teamwork in a way that I don't think many things require in prison, and that's where I think something's amazing. And it's just, getting to watch some of the guys' daughters see him do something totally different than they've ever seen. Like, I've just seen so many beautiful moments from family members with the people on stage that are just magical. Yeah. And I don't know, Leah, if you want to say anything.
Hi. We'll see how long I last here, because my connection is kind of wonky. But just very, very briefly, I mean, I've worked in the system since 1985 as a teacher, and in the last few years as a mentor and running my own theater program. My thing in terms of what I try to offer them is a full experience of a theater program, so that it's not just an acting class, it's not just doing exercises, but it's giving the entire experience, because that's where I find that people's lives transform, because you have to get through the entire process to get to the end. And I've seen it over and over again of guys who, first of all, I could say with confidence, that was Louis, who didn't really want to be in that class. I had to drag him into that class and say, you can do this. Like, you should do this. You really should do this. To people who want to quit every single week, to the day before we perform, they still want to quit. They don't want to deal with the hassle of having to go do a performance in a visiting area where before you go, you have to strip down on your way in and strip down on your way out. And they don't necessarily see the advantage of having to go through that process, particularly when you're a guy who's never had a visit and you've been there for 20 years. Like, why would you want to strip down for that? Just let everybody else go do it. But that's where theater is uniquely poised, because it's a collaborative art form. And if you want to not live in the woods by yourself, but you want to live in the world with people, it's a really good way to learn how to live with people, because we're not always going to like them, but we're going to get through this together. And you try and form a piece that has the best interest of all of the individuals in that room with what you've got. That's what we're always trying to look for. How do we meld the group that we have to make the best piece that we can? And to have it be real, to not shy away from difficult language, to not shy away from difficult emotional scenes, and bring them up to a standard that I would ask any professional equity actor to be doing. So yeah, we're very lucky when we can work inside. But the only thing I would have to say is that, people, we talk a little bit about Montana. Montana, the laws are harsh. And we think we don't have an issue in Montana, but just one tiny statistic is that in Montana, the Native American population makes up 6% of the entire population. And yet in the men's prison, they make up 22%. And in the women's prison, they make up 38%. And 10% of Native American women are missing. So if you're a Native American woman, you got a 50% chance that you're either missing or in prison. It's insane. And yet we look to California as the most progressive, and California is the most progressive in providing arts funding, but it's also the most regressive in the sense that it's ridiculous. The laws are skewed. It is ridiculous the way that people are locked up for sentences for 80 years. Like, for something they did when they were 12 or 13. It's a very sad state of affairs. And I could go on, but I'll just say thank you so much, Louis and Lee, for sharing your stories. Thank you. And thank you, Whitney.